Hello, internet friends. My name is Betsy Woodruff. This is the Woodruff and Strauss Blogging Heads show, and we have a fun situation because Daniel Strauss, who is typically one of the official people involved in this, is between jobs right now. He is is about to leave or has left Talking Points Memo, and he's going to be starting at Politico in a couple weeks. So he's on vacation, sort of shoring up his emotional strength.
He's taking time to discover himself a little bit. We're going to Politico.
Exactly. Yeah, he's trying to
find his inner Daniel. So
exactly. Yeah.
Wish him well in that.
Yeah. So Jim, you're the official stand-in while Daniel's on the Daniel hunt.
I am a politics writer for Salon. Happy to be back on the program.
Woo! Likewise.
Okay.
Good. Good. Yeah. So today we're going to be talking about the political fallout of the coming King v. Burwell decision. We are also going to talk about how Hillary is doing at energizing the base, whether or not that's a thing that's happening. And we'll talk about Disney World and Republicans going there. So it should be fun. Jim, I am not a healthcare expert or a Supreme Court expert, so I'm kind of going to defer to you on the King v. Burwell thing. What is sort of like the big picture, what people need to know about it?
Right. So King v. Burwell is the lawsuit that they heard oral arguments in March about. The decision's going to come out sometime this month. It's going to be one of the big cases. The question is whether Obamacare, as written, allowed for people who purchase health insurance plans through federally facilitated exchanges, i.e. in states where the states didn't set up their own exchanges, whether they're able to get subsidies for their health care plans. It sort of relies on this very strict reading of the law where there's a clause that says subsidies shall be available on exchanges established by the state. The law has more ambiguous language elsewhere, and everyone else who was around at the time of the drafting of the law has said it was never our intention that people couldn't get subsidies. But anyway,
although you have like the Jonathan Gruber thing where people found tapes of Gruber, one of the architects, saying...
Yes, that is the one guy. Yeah, Jonathan Gruber, who was one of the architects, said, right. He was seen giving a couple of lectures last year.
That intimated that these subsidies were only going to be available to people who set up state exchanges, or that the subsidies were supposed to be an impetus to the states to set up their own exchanges. Sort of like a carrot-stick situation, where if the states didn't set up the exchanges, their residents wouldn't get subsidies, and that would be bad for them, so the subsidies were designed to get them to set up exchanges. And Gruber has since, I think he's walked back all those comments, said, I didn't mean to say that, context, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, so. And he is, sort of an outlier in that. Everyone else who was around at the time said that coercion was never really the stakes, but anyway, we'll see. The tea leaf reading after the oral arguments in March was that they're probably not going to nix the subsidies. But we're still, seeing all the planning for what's going to happen if they do nix those subsidies and what's going to happen afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
So there's sort of, at least on the left, there's sort of two minds about this. One is that it's going to backfire so badly for Republicans if they nix the subsidies that it's going to throw the whole party into chaos because then people lose their subsidies and blame Republicans. I think that's a little bit of wishful thinking. I think Republicans are going to be extremely excited that they've taken out a major component of Obamacare here, and then that they'll have leverage in Congress to try and pass, something that they want to fix the whole system. There was a couple polls come out yesterday showing, and all the polls have basically said that Democrats, obviously, but independents as well. And in some polls, Republicans want the subsidies to be restored. They don't want the Supreme Court to strike them down because that's one of the most popular parts of the law.
Mm-hmm.
But Republicans in Congress, they're not just going to, President Obama talked yesterday about that Congress could just fix this with one sentence, just clarifying language that subsidies should be available to everyone.
Uh-huh.
Obviously, Republicans aren't going to do that because they have leverage here. They want to extract something out of it.
All right.
So I don't think that this is going to be great for either side. I don't think anyone should be looking forward to, the other side is going to totally backfire on them, or this is going to make them look like a mess or whatever. If you look at also the plans that have been put forward, the fixes, especially the one that Senator Ron Johnson from Wisconsin, he's actually introduced legislation. There have been others that have been described just in sort of vague op-eds. His would restore subsidies temporarily through 2017 while getting rid of the employer mandate and the individual mandate, which are sort of other core components of Obamacare.
Yeah.
So that's not a fix. It's something that restores one core component while gutting the rest, pretty much. And obviously, this isn't going to go anywhere. It's veto bait. But
Right.
It does give Republicans some cover to say, well, President Obama said that we should restore the subsidies, and look, we restored the subsidies.
Right.
And it doesn't hurt either that the individual mandate, even if it might make the law work economically, is not a popular thing.
Yeah.
So basically, we have a situation where it's going to be gridlock. I don't see anything coming out. There's some people, some liberals, I think Jonathan Chait wrote something yesterday about how it's just going to be a mess and Republicans will be fighting, and eventually they'll have to pass some sort of clean fix, restoring the subsidies for everyone with no strings attached. I don't see that happening because it's going to be so hard for a lot of Republicans in general to just extend anything in Obamacare, even temporarily.
Yeah, that's totally true. I mean, definitely.
Yeah.
You can't understate the level of Republican opposition to Obamacare, even now, right? Even when was it passed? 2009?
2010,
2010, even 5 years later. So, I think that's totally true. So you think Johnson's idea of extend the subsidies temporarily while getting rid of the employer and individual mandates, you think, politically that's smart?
I mean, it's smart. Because this is something where, he's going to go out there and say, we're going to have the subsidies, which are popular, and we're just going to get rid of the individual mandate. And he said something like, all we're asking in exchange for restoring the subsidies is a little bit of freedom in return.
Uh-huh.
Which, I mean, that sounds nice. It's a good soundbite.
Uh-huh.
And then you have people like, me or whoever going out there and being like, well, it could set the risk pools out of balance if you get rid of the individual mandate, and then there'll be a spiraling of prices and premiums or whatever. And it's hard to sort of, one side has a simpler way of communicating this to the public or whatever.
Right. Yeah, I feel like you start losing people as soon as you start talking about risk pools going askew.
Yeah, I think so. And so, Obama, if he even made it out of Congress, if Johnson's bill, if that's what they went with, and if that made that out of Congress, Obama would veto it. I think it would probably get filibustered in the Senate anyway, so it wouldn't even get that far. But then that would allow Republicans to say, we tried to pass it, and we tried to pass it while getting rid of this other unpopular part, but Democrats said no. And I think that's potent.
Huh. Is there a House substitute or a House fix?
There are some plans sort of floating around. There's one that Paul Ryan and a couple of other committee chairmen were working on that would basically allow states to opt out of Obamacare, which is also something that is not going to go anywhere with Democrats because it's just going to restore, half the country probably to pre-Obamacare status or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But I think if you're talking about, I understand, I think it's reasonable that Republicans will want to extract something out of this if they're going to fix the subsidies, because that's a difficult thing for them to do.
Yeah, totally.
Surprisingly,
I mean, there would be Republicans getting primaried if the subsidies get overturned, and then they're like, we're fixing it, we're going to make it work.
So guys will be primaried. If they're actually looking to have a negotiation, though, reaching some sort of deal, it would have to be getting rid of some part of Obamacare that is not structurally vital to it. You could get rid of one of the taxes, one of the revenue sources in it. Yeah. The mechanics of the law would work similarly, but you could get rid of the medical device tax or the surtax on investments or something like that, and it would. I don't know if you would have to have offsets for that or anything.
Right, and the other
but
problem,
it'd be a price that wouldn't just sort of blow up the whole insurance mechanisms in the law.
And the other problem with getting rid of the medical device tax politically is that if that happens, then the medical device industry won't be as gung-ho about full Obamacare repeal or a full replacement. So Republicans could potentially, make their coalition smaller and less effective. It's kind of analogous to what happens.
That's a whole, that's part of the whole thing about not wanting to extend any portion, or not wanting to reform Obamacare at all, just sort of wanting it to, maintain that.
Don't
that
fix anyone's problem, so everybody has to stay on board with it. Kind of the same thing you see with Democrats and immigration, where it's like all or nothing, either tech visas and high skill visas and low skill visas and guest worker program and pathway to citizenship, or nobody's getting any of that. Because if they start saying, well, okay, we'll give Silicon Valley tech visas, then all of a sudden they don't have, they lose a huge part or a very effective part of their immigration reform coalition. So it's interesting how you kind of see these coalitions sort of saying, we'll all hang together or we all hang separately, that kind of thing. It makes a lot of these big policy overhauls a lot more difficult, I think.
Right. And there's another part I think that Republicans are banking on. And the reason why I think that this whole thing is not going to blow up in their face, I think they're basing a lot of their thinking and their talking points on the idea that Democrats own the health insurance industry by passing that law now. And so anything that gets, anything bad that happens in the health insurance sector, if you get rid of subsidies and premiums jump up, then Democrats are going to naturally be blamed. Because people will be like, well, Obamacare passed and then this happened.
Right.
I don't know if you saw that tweet from John Thune yesterday. So I have it open here, and I would like to read for the Blogging Hits audience this tweet from Senator John Thune.
A Republican senator.
He's a Republican senator in the leadership. He wrote, 6 million people risk losing their health care subsidies. Yet POTUS continues to deny that Obamacare is bad for the American people. And so what he's saying there is Obamacare may be gutted by the Supreme Court, which may, result in people losing their subsidies, but Obama still says that Obamacare is good. So it doesn't really make sense. And he got made fun of a lot for that. But I think we're going to hear a lot of those things. People just banking on the idea that, well, there are always these subsidies that existed. And then, because Obamacare was poorly written, they're going to go away, even though the subsidies were, part of Obamacare.
Yeah.
So
totally. I'm looking at that. It's basically what he says is 6 million people might lose money that they're getting because of Obamacare, but Obama still doesn't understand that Obamacare is bad for the American people.
Right.
Which is not certainly ripe for a level of ridicule. But yeah, you're right, and I think that's also maybe analogous to the way we talk about Republicans. One of my coworkers is in here. Hi, Tim. Hi, Tim. I think this is also analogous to the way we talk about Democrats and ISIS, right? Democrats are in charge. ISIS is, going gung-ho in Western Syria and Ramadi, and it's their fault, right? You own it. If you're in charge of things, you own it. Any problem is going to be Democrats' fault no matter what. And I think, absolutely Republicans can sell that, without a doubt. And I think it works with healthcare too. Totally.
Yeah.
Even though the reason King v. Burwell is even happening is because of apparently, it looks like badly written language. Although, people will debate, no, that was actually the intent. It seems like at least the Beltway media consensus is that this is a legislative drafting problem, not a big picture policy idea problem.
I mean, it's important to look at the language later in the law, too, which says where the state doesn't establish its exchange, the federal government will set up, and this is not the verbatim wording, obviously, the federal government will come in and set it up.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, I think that is, that's obviously one of the arguments against the King case, is saying it was clear that, everyone was supposed to have, where there were exchanges, subsidies were part of the exchanges.
Mm-hmm.
And the federal government, if the federal government is going to set up the exchange, then the subsidies will be available because the subsidies are a major part of how the exchanges work.
Right.
But there are people who would furiously deny that. So,
yeah. So,
but I don't know. It looked, again, we're just sort of theorizing here, and we'll see how the decision comes out.
Do we have any estimate of when we're getting the decision?
Well, they usually leave these bigger ones for the end of the term, so probably, in the last week of the month, I would guess.
So exciting! So much suspense, yeah.
Well, that, and we'll have gay marriage, and then there'll probably be all sorts of other things, that are less sexy, but are
we already had
considerably even more important, and we'll just look over those, and then look, 5 years later and be like, oh, that was a terrible case. I don't know. Anyway.
Yeah, true. Lots of fun. That Supreme Court branch of the government, they got to do some
crazy.
things. They're kind of
doing their
interesting.
thing, just hanging out.
just whatever. Seems like a pretty good gig, you know?
It is, yeah.
Yeah. Good job.
I do it. No one's asked me. I don't know why.
Good to know. Well, maybe one of your presidential candidate friends, if he or she wins, you can get shortlisted.
Oh yeah, I think so.
I think so.
That's the plan.
Totally. Cool. Well, speaking of presidential candidates, the next thing we want to talk about is Hillary's gangbusters base excitement and how amazing she's doing at getting activists pumped up. And this is another area where I am kind of the opposite of an expert, so I will let you take it away on that one, whether or not that's a thing that's happening.
So there was a big article in the New York Times this weekend about how Hillary Clinton is running a campaign to turn out Democratic voters rather than running a centrist campaign aimed at the median voter that would, look at a broad swath of independents. And of course, there's an angle in this article about how it's very different from the campaign that Bill Clinton ran in 1992, which I don't exactly know what the point of that was.
2015 campaign different from 1992 campaign.
Underlying factors change in politics over the course of several decades.
Tell me more.
You had her officials saying things like, well, this is really the only way to do it now with so few true independent voters. With things so polarized, you just have to sort of give your people what you want and hope that turns them out, and then you'd win with, 51% or whatever. The thing that I thought was interesting was the evidence that they used to say that Hillary's become some aggressive liberal who has quite clearly chosen this path of avoiding the center to go straight for the lefty, hippies up in arms against the state and the corporations campaign.
Yeah.
It mentioned things she said about same-sex marriage, about comprehensive immigration reform, about criminal justice reform, about voting rights. I didn't see any of these as evidence that she had jumped in whole hog with the lefties. These are sort of things that everyone, whether you're a member of the left part of the Democratic Party or a centrist part of the Democratic Party, you support all of these things. I mean, you obviously support expanding voting rights or protecting voting rights. You support same-sex marriage. You support comprehensive immigration reform. Criminal justice reform. I mean, that's bipartisan.
Rick Perry is probably the most impressive lawmaker on criminal justice reform.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's the one the one area of bipartisan consensus.
Yeah. Total.
So I didn't really see these, and it made me think about. And this is something that I wrote this morning. She hasn't really answered questions on the areas where there are fault lines in the Democratic Party. She hasn't really fleshed out a broad economic message, and she's going to. I mean, she says she's going to after this rally she's having on Roosevelt Island. But you look at what Bernie Sanders is saying, and he is staking out that left position.
Yep.
He's saying we want to use the tax code to directly transfer wealth downward.
Right.
A very direct left appealing message. Hillary Clinton hasn't given her view on how she would change economic, You don't
think Hillary's going to come out for a wealth redistribution?
No, I'm not sure. But the New York Times gave off the impression that Hillary is, she's a flaming socialist now.
She's some crazy lefty. She wants to let the gays marry each other.
I know.
Wow, nuts.
It's insane, yeah.
You won't believe this lady. She wants immigration reform.
She wants immigration reform.
Hold on to your hats.
She wants to allow an arduous path to citizenship. I mean, it's just nightmare stuff.
Okay, wow, pretty radical. I mean, so you literally none of the. So what are the big issues that make her some sort of crazy Occupy Wall Street lefty? Comprehensive immigration reform, which Lindsey Graham supports. Criminal justice reform, which Rick Perry already did. Same-sex marriage, which the majority of young Republican voters and close to a majority of Republican voters support, so that's obviously super far left. And then expanded voting access, which, while more of a lefty issue, is also pretty mainstream in the Democratic Party.
I can't think issue because it's how the Democratic Party is going to survive as a party. So obviously, everyone in the Democratic Party supports this.
Right.
But
I don't
you're
think,
right. Like,
none of
these
this is
issues are things
controversial
that-
at all. Besides the voting thing, every single stance she has is something that has been loudly and effectively trumpeted by conservative Republicans in the last few years.
Right.
Like people like the far left Lindsey Graham, people like the far left Rob Portman. I mean, congratulations, Hillary. I don't think it's weird. And can I say something else? Here's what I think is interesting about that is not only what the New York Times cited as an example for being far left, but also what they don't talk about. Because you remember the Kromnibus vote in last December when Congress had to pass legislation keeping the government open that involved some immigration policy stuff. And there was this huge House Democrat revolt where a number of House Democrats, sort of goaded by Elizabeth Warren, said, we don't like this Kromnibus legislation because putting aside the immigration and spending issues, it changes campaign finance rules to make it so the parties can raise more money, and it rolls back some of the Dodd-Frank Wall Street regulations. And I remember there was this marathon, multi-hour meeting of the House Democratic Caucus in the basement of Congress, and one of Obama's top staffers was there and sort of snuck in, was like, hey guys, come on, I need you to get on board with this. I forget what the guy's name, I forget which staffer it was. But that's okay. It's not.
It was a high level staffer.
And I know who this person is. Dennis McDonough.
Yeah.
Dennis
Chief
McDonough.
of Staff. I think.
Yeah. Chief of Staff. Who came here and crawled down through the basement of Congress to try to get these guys on board. And I remember House Democrats coming out, and we'd get a new House Democrat every 10 minutes, and they'd be like, "This is unbelievable. Democrats have lost their soul. This is why we got killed in the midterms. We're not standing up to Wall Street. We're not standing up to money in politics. We're super upset about this." Pelosi was upset about it. I mean, this pitted leadership against leadership among House Democrats. It was like bloodbath. And it was over those two issues. It was over Wall Street regulation and campaign finance. And those are two issues that Hillary is not talking about and that apparently the New York Times is not talking about. But those seem like perhaps the two
she is talking about campaign finance.
Yeah.
I would say sort of she's another person saying we'll pass a constitutional amendment to, overturn Citizens United. And of course, that's not going to happen.
No. And it's not her issue. But it's not her issue, right? And it's not something that she's been strong enough on or dogged enough on where the New York Times is saying that it's going to help her out with the far left.
But there are things that, I mean, what you're saying is any issue where there is division within the Democratic Party, she is either not touching or dodging on. So it's hard to tell what side she's chosen. Mm-hmm. If you look at TPP and Trade Promotion Authority, she issued a statement like a month ago or something basically saying, well, we need to look and hold out on further review for this. Mm-hmm. And it should have high environmental and labor standards and blah, blah, blah. And what she was saying when she was Secretary of State, she said, quote, this is the gold standard of trade agreements. She was going out there saying this is the best trade agreement ever. Right. And you could say maybe that was just her job as a deputy in the Obama administration. Mm-hmm. But I think that's probably closer to her view. She probably does not think that TPP is the apocalypse.
Right.
She's probably inclined to support it. And more importantly, if it was negotiated before she came into office, she wouldn't pull out of it. So
totally,
but she's keeping her hands away from that. And she'll have time to explain these things, but it's a little early to declare, I think, that she is
hero of the left.
Yeah, that she's going to take all the money and give it to me, the poor internet writer. I would love that. That's all I want in 2016. Whoever supports more welfare for Jim Newell, that's all I want. I'm a single issue vote.
Classic Democrat.
Yeah, money-grunting Democrat.
You don't surprise me at all. And I mean, also, those are issues that Bernie Sanders is talking about all day, every day, which I think is
all he'll talk about.
Yeah, because he's not stupid. He knows his audience.
He's gotten criticism for not talking about issues like criminal justice reform or policing abuses. Mm-hmm. There have been some people criticizing him that he's so single-mindedly focused on these underlying economic inequality issues that he's avoiding issues that might be popular to Democratic constituencies like black voters.
Right.
Which
Oh no, you just froze up for a second. Hold up. Come back, Jim.
For a classic.
Hang on. 1 second. You're frozen up.
Hello?
Hang on. Are you there?
I'm here.
Okay, you're back. So you said these issues that might be popular to Democratic constituencies like black voters. Can you pick up there?
Sure, yeah. Bernie Sanders has gotten some criticism that he focused on talking about structural problems with the economy, that he won't talk about police abuses or other issues that right now are of great importance to black voters.
Mm-hmm.
But that's just, it's sort of a different outlook from a left candidate who's thinking until you change these structural abuses in the country, then you're not, these are all symptoms of it, basically.
And I'm sure Sanders also would support criminal justice reform that made police less, that made, that rolled back the prison industrial complex, if you will.
Of course, which is why I think it's maybe a bit of an overblown criticism, perhaps prompted from the Hillary Clinton side.
You think? Maybe a little bit. Maybe, perhaps? Yeah. No, I think.
No, I don't think that Bernie Sanders hates black people.
Reporting, investigation, a Salon report. Bernie Sanders does not hate black people. It's good. You should write something on that.
Okay, maybe I will.
That'd be a good article.
It'll just be that one sentence, I think.
I'd click. I'd give that a click.
Well, that's all that matters. I don't want anyone to read the article. I just want the click.
You just want them to click it and then copy and paste it into their Facebook status. That's all that matters.
Yeah, pretty much.
Basically. Yeah. Cool. Well, good. Do we have any other thoughts on whether or not Hillary Clinton is as far left as the New York Times says she is?
Well, I mean, the other thing where there may be some problems with her is foreign policy, which she hasn't really talked about at all.
Yeah,
and that's always, when you're talking about Hillary in a Democratic primary, she is a hawk.
Yeah.
So we don't know how she's going to thread that needle yet.
Yep. No, it's true. And I think sort of the amount of excitement that Bernie Sanders generates on social media and on Reddit and among sort of basic internet population, I think it's telling. Like, anytime you go to the politics subreddit, half the stories are, Wall Street is quaking in their boots over what's going to happen when President Sanders brings down the hammer. Like, it's all stuff like that. Or, Bernie Sanders is raising tons of money because of all the people giving him $1. It's like obvious that...
Oh, he has the energy.
Yeah, without a doubt.
I think that the Hillary Clinton campaign may be happy that her chief rival is Bernie Sanders, though, because he sort of does have a Ron Paul issue where he gets a significant portion of the party very energized and loyal behind him.
Yeah.
But it's capped. He's not someone who is likely, I would say, to win over a majority of Democratic Party. So he can take 25, 30%, maybe, if he's lucky, I would say. Then Hillary can have everything left. And then Martin O'Malley and Lincoln Chafee can run around doing God knows what.
So Sanders is saying he thinks he's going to win New Hampshire. Do you think there's any credence to that? Should we give any credence to that?
I have no idea. I think he's probably more likely, if he's going to win states, to win a caucus state where you can have organizers who put something together really well. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure about that, though.
Yeah, that makes sense. Cool.
He's from Vermont. Vermont is very different from New Hampshire. I don't know.
They're both really pretty, though. They're both tiny little states.
They're both great. They're both wonderful American states. So.
Wonderful American states. Exactly. Yes. Very American. Cool. Well, and then another wonderful American state. I'm getting so good at these segues. Another wonderful American state is Florida, where I went last week for the Republican Disney World Palooza. That was a lot of fun. And we talked about, this is our third agenda item. So I'm curious. Well, okay. I wrote kind of two larger stories from Florida, both about Scott Walker, and I also wrote a third one about Jeb Bush. But the Scott Walker stories, one that's up today, is about Walker's outreach to homeschoolers. Every time Walker talks about education, at least whenever I've heard him talk about it, last couple of years, he always brings up homeschooling. I think he's the only Republican candidate that I have heard talk about homeschooling in front of a non-homeschool audience. He always brings it up. He always does it, which is very interesting. So I emailed some questions to his staff that they passed on to him, and he sent answers back to me about his relationship with the homeschool community, how he gets along with homeschoolers in Wisconsin, what kind of policy changes he would support for homeschoolers, etc. It's kind of obviously a very niche issue since most people don't homeschool. But homeschoolers have massive influence in Iowa because they're very organized. They're very politically active. The Iowa statewide homeschool organization called Niche is super effective. And there's, people argue that the reason Huckabee won in 2008 and Santorum did so well in 2012 is because they were able to sort of get homeschoolers behind them, get homeschoolers to go to caucuses and bring their friends and get their networks involved, and it was really important. So I think the fact, I don't know that it's by design that Walker has been talking about homeschooling for so long. I mean, he was talking about it on his reelect campaign trail. I think as far back as 2014, maybe I don't think 2013, but 2014 State of the State was talking about homeschooling. So, long before he was seen as a presidential frontrunner, long before he was, hiking around Iowa. But it's interesting, and I think that could give him credibility with the homeschool community.
Well, and he's dominating in Iowa right now.
Yeah.
So
probably not hurting.
He may be picking up some of those Huckabee voters.
Yeah.
But could you explain to me, because I don't know the policy arguments here. What do homeschooling organizations want? I gather they want more homeschooling and more to make it easier for homeschooling.
So yes, so homeschool law is state level. Basically, all homeschool policies are decided by states. Some states have very expansive, friendly homeschool laws. Virginia has a really friendly homeschool law. Wisconsin has a really friendly homeschool law. Other states have much more restrictive homeschool laws, where there's a lot more, maybe where homeschoolers might have to take standardized tests every year. The parents might have to tell what the curriculum is to the school board. The parents might have to register their house as a private school. In some states, there's a push that homeschool moms should have to get a teacher certification before they can homeschool. So there's a really broad spectrum of homeschool law, and it depends 100% on which state you live in. So most homeschool policy is state-based, and homeschoolers look at different states and say, we want maybe the policy to be more expansive, more friendly in states like New York, and then in states like Wisconsin, the homeschoolers' number one goal is just not changing the homeschool law, because the homeschool law is very welcoming. Homeschoolers really like it, makes it very easy to homeschool. And that law was signed in 1984. So the Wisconsin homeschool groups that I talked to just said, we just don't want any of this law changed. As long as the law doesn't get changed, we're good.
There's very much overlap with homeschooling advocates and evangelicals, right?
Yes.
Because they want to do more religiously based curriculum.
Yes. A lot of homeschoolers are evangelical Christians. Not all of them. And I think the homeschool movement has gotten more diverse politically as well as religiously, over the course of as the movement has grown and as it's gotten easier to homeschool. Like in DC, there were a number of stories about African-American homeschool families making co-ops and deciding to homeschool because they wanted more Afrocentric curriculum. Obviously not from a conservative evangelical perspective. But yes, it's right that the majority or the plurality of homeschoolers are evangelical Christians, particularly in Iowa. But they don't have policy hopes that are particularly faith-based, if that makes sense. So the other policy issue that is really important to homeschoolers nationally is Common Core. Homeschoolers worry that as Common Core becomes more ingrained in school districts and as there's more national influence on education policy, that it will be harder for them to have control over their curriculum, that they're going to have to change how they teach kids math, that they're going to have to tailor their curriculums for standardized tests that maybe reflect Common Core directives. They worry there's kind of a slippery slope there. They just don't like anything that involves the federal government getting more involved in state education policies. So I would say to a man, homeschoolers are against Common Core. And actually, some homeschool families that I've talked to start homeschooling because of Common Core. Because their kids come home from school and they don't understand the math homework and they're worried about the increased federal involvement in education policy, so they start homeschooling. Homeschoolers, I have yet to talk to homeschoolers who think Common Core is a good idea. It's possible there are homeschoolers who believe that, totally plausible, but not something that I've seen. And especially in Iowa, I think Common Core is an essential issue for the homeschool community. Another issue that's a little smaller and a little wonkier in Wisconsin is whether or not homeschoolers can play on public school sports teams. So these are often called TiVo laws. And the Wisconsin homeschool community is actually super divided about this. Like you'd think the homeschoolers would want to be on sports, but some of them are actually really against it. And the reason that some Wisconsin homeschoolers, although not all, and there's not great data on what percent of homeschoolers are for and against, but the reason some Wisconsin homeschoolers are against them being allowed to play on public school sports is that, so let me backtrack a little bit. The budget that Walker's going to sign in a couple weeks includes a provision saying homeschoolers can play on public school sports teams as long as they are showing adequate academic performance. So homeschoolers' concern is that once school boards start saying this is how homeschoolers need to perform academically,
they're making conditions.
They're making conditions, and they worry that that could expand. And eventually school boards might say, oh, wow, this homeschool athlete isn't exhibiting adequate academic performance. Maybe other homeschoolers aren't doing well. Maybe we need to have more school board involvement. And they worry it's a slippery slope, that as soon as you have school boards setting up standards for homeschoolers, that those standards will be enforced on all homeschoolers. Now, there's two homeschool groups in Wisconsin. One of them is the Wisconsin Parents Association. They're in that slippery slope camp. They're very against the sports provision. The other is the Wisconsin Christian Home Educators Association. They don't care. They're neutral. They're like, we're not worried about it. It's not going to happen. This is not, some conspiracy to have the state government, ban homeschooling or to have the state government get super involved in homeschool curriculum making. But it's divisive. And some of the homeschoolers in Wisconsin that I talked to for my story on Walker and homeschooling were concerned that he supports the sports provision. But again, controversial, a little wonky, and not something that's going to be a problem for Walker as he's campaigning. I don't think any Iowa homeschoolers are going to say, oh, Scott Walker let homeschoolers play sports. He must be some terrible statist guy. We're not voting for him.
He's a monster. Him and his backdoor sports Common Core agenda.
Yeah, right, yeah. So Common Core is a bigger issue. There's a couple of provisions that are also in the budget that Walker will sign before announcing his presidential bid. A couple of provisions in the budget that limit Common Core in Wisconsin. But my guess is that Common Core opponents will say it doesn't go as far as they want it to go, that it doesn't ban Common Core, that it's not a muscular enough repeal, and that they'll probably, I don't know, they may or may not be satisfied with how that ends up. So that's kind of TBD, something to keep an eye on. So those are the policy issues that are important to homeschoolers, at least in a nutshell.
No, that was very interesting. I wish I had something to add to that, but I don't know. It really gets into the weeds there. But I had heard about these issues. I had heard about the sports issue too, but I didn't know that was also seen as maybe a trap.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's seen as, and a lot of homeschool groups are neutral on it. Mm-hmm. Yeah, instead of coming out in favor of sports. So it's interesting. It's an interesting thing.
What did you think about? So before the Florida summit last week, Scott Walker had said in an interview that he's going to compete everywhere except for maybe Florida because Marco Rubio and Jeb Bush sort of have that down.
Yeah.
And then Florida Republicans get all worked up. They're like, oh, you need to come to Florida. If you don't compete in Florida, then you'll never go anywhere. Blah blah blah. What they're basically saying is come in and help us raise money. So then, from what I saw, when Scott Walker went to this event in Florida, he said, "Oh yeah, I'm gonna compete in Florida hard, like nobody's business.
I'll be in Florida all the time." Yeah,
right. But I mean, what he said originally was absolutely true. Florida is a very expensive state. There are two candidates right now, and before we're even starting, I mean, Rubio and Jeb each have about 30% of early polling support in Florida now. So there's not much from elsewhere, so you're going to go into a state where there's 10 media markets, and you're not going to win. Right. You don't want to build up expectations. You don't want to blow through all your money. Right. So obviously you're not going to spend that much time in Florida. Right. But it's just funny when these things happen, these candidates let slip these strategic ideas they may have. Like when Jeb Bush said, Jeb Bush says he's going to campaign very hard in Florida, but then he's not going to do the Iowa straw poll. Right. And it's very clear that there's not a whole lot in Iowa for Jeb, but when you say not to do it, then you get the state activists being like, well, if he doesn't come to Iowa, he's not going anywhere. Iowans are the best people in the freaking world.
Yeah, right.
So it's just funny to see all these things. But for Florida, there is no point for anyone else going there, at least as it looks now. We'll see what happens when a candidate, maybe if Scott Walker won Iowa and won, he may not win New Hampshire, but if he won South Carolina too, then there may be some pressure for him to do something in Florida. Maybe that would shift. Maybe Jeb Bush at that point would have kicked the can and been like, I'm done with this. This is terrible. Why am I doing this?
This isn't fun.
Yeah. So I mean, they're all going to have a lot of money.
Right.
At least those three, Jeb and Rubio and Walker, they're going to have plenty of money. So there's no need to go for the early knockout or anything like that.
Right, yeah. I think the best argument I've heard for why it would be smart for Walker to compete in the Florida primary, even if he doesn't actually win, is that if he becomes a nominee and he doesn't have any Florida infrastructure and hasn't started building those relationships, that gives him a big disadvantage. Because you basically have to win Florida if you're going to be president. And if Walker just doesn't go there and doesn't start working on it, then it could be a big drawback to him. Now, what's interesting...
You can say infrastructure, but you probably don't want to drop like $10 million on ads or something.
Right. And what's interesting, too, is that Walker has been quoted as saying he thinks Rubio would be a really good running mate, and that he likes Rubio a lot. So I think
that's a major backhanded compliment there.
Yeah,
oh, Rubio,
I know.
He'd be good as my second in command.
He'd be a good scheduler.
Yeah.
But I think it's totally plausible that Walker is thinking, why would I compete in Florida? Because either it's going to kill me and I won't be the nominee because I'll come out so damaged and so poor. Or if I do manage to be the nominee, I can get Rubio to be my vice president, and Rubio knows everybody there and has those relationships. So why would I bother duplicating what I can basically graft onto my campaign? Does that make sense? I think if that's the thought process, I think that's totally logical and makes sense to me.
I also think some of these things are a little overrated about, well, he needs to have the infrastructure there for Florida. The Republican Party is going to have an infrastructure set up for whoever the nominee is going to win. It's going to be. So it's not like if he won the nomination and then people in Florida be like, who's this Scott Walker guy? Like, I never heard of him. He hasn't come to my retirement community and, kiss cheeks or anything. I don't care for this man.
He hasn't eaten alligator while wearing Mickey Mouse ears. I don't trust this guy.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I agree. And the other thing that's interesting about Florida is that Florida is a very purple state, right? About as purple as they come. But Republicans have win every single statewide office except for the one Democratic senator. Every statewide elected person in Florida is a Republican. Republicans also control both chambers of the legislature. They have congressional seats there that they probably shouldn't have that are like purple/blue congressional seats. And the reason is because the Florida Republican Party is really good at what they do. They're just very effective.
A lot of the reason of that, too, is the same story across the country where you have the Democratic Party doing well at the presidential level or in presidential years, but so many statewide elections are held in midterm cycles where the Republicans are much better at turnout. Mm-hmm. So that's part of it. I mean, when was the last time Florida had a Democratic governor? Like, it was like 30 years ago or something,
It's
right?
been a really long time. But but this is also a trend that's sort of grown up since Jeb Bush started getting involved in Florida politics. I think I was talking to George Lemieux. I believe he's the person who told me this. He was a former Florida Republican senator at the Orlando event. And he said Jeb Bush was basically the George Washington of the Florida GOP because he got involved, he started doing organizing, he started building connections between the Republican Party and the Cuban community in southern Florida. And as he invested more in the party, spent more time there, did more fundraising, the party went from basically non-existent to dominant. Like Republicans controlling all of Florida would be like Democrats controlling all of Tennessee, or it would be like if Democrats were absolutely dominant in North Carolina state level politics. We'd be like, wait, what's going on? This doesn't make sense. Florida is tailor-made for the Obama
those states
coalition.
just mentioned, Democrats did used to be dominant, but that was sort of like old hangovers from, Southern Democrats,
right?
60s or whatever.
These
people live to be 100 years old, and they're in the legislature forever, and their children all vote for Democrats.
Right.
And then at some point they realize, oh, wait, we're Republicans. So, now they've taken over.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. So, anyway, how that relates to Walker is the Florida Republican Party is really talented, and they're good at what they do, and they've been very effective at putting Republicans in charge of almost everything in a state where Republicans should not be in charge of everything. And whoever the Republican nominee is likely to benefit at least some from that infrastructure. Obviously, TBD how effective that is in a presidential year, but the nominee is likely to benefit some from that. That said, it might behoove Walker to make a couple friends in the Florida legislature and talk to a couple donors there.
Sure.
Those are my thoughts. Those are my takes.
Speaking of, well, are we done? Do we have time for one more thing?
Let's do one more thing. Yeah.
Did you read that latest Rubio slam piece in the New York Times this morning?
No. What was it?
It was basically looking at his personal financial management over the years, which has not been especially good. He's been broke a couple of times, and he gets a bunch of money from a book or something, and then he buys a boat, and then he's in debt again, and then he buys a big house. And I know. The question is, okay, and he's admitted, like, I haven't had the best bookkeeping skills or whatever. And so you're already getting, this came after last week, then there was a very ludicrous story in the New York Times about how Marco Rubio, it was framed as Marco Rubio and his wife have had 17 speeding tickets, traffic violations in the last 20 years.
Yeah.
Marco Rubio's had 4 in the last 20 years, which is, people from Florida say that's actually not bad at all. Like, that's pretty good. If you count my speeding camera traffic tickets, I've had probably 20 in the last 4 years. So that, I think
that was a stretch. That was, yeah.
It was silly. But now there's this look, and now there's a debate again about, like, is the New York Times, what are they going after here? Or is it, my view is that we don't need to look at everything as an article saying this person should or should not be president. I think it's something interesting about his past, but I think the question of whether your personal financial management says something about whether you're qualified to be president, I tend to think it doesn't.
Yeah.
As someone who is not good at managing money whatsoever, I tend to sympathize with Marco Rubio here. But
makes it more relatable.
But I think it's a fair story to publish and has some interesting details. And there may be some voters who are like, well, look at this guy. He gets this money and then he goes and buys a boat and then he's broke again.
I want a boat.
I don't want that man.
If I had money, I would buy a boat.
Yeah, I don't know. He said he wanted a boat. He said it was his dream to have a boat forever. So then he got his boat, and I don't know. Now he's having to cash out his retirement account.
It happens.
It happens. But I think it's fair to publish.
Yeah,
I can see why some people don't think it matters, but maybe it doesn't matter. But I think it's fair to publish, and it's interesting. And
I think also not every story has to be something that sways a vote. I don't think journalists...
Some things are just interesting to know.
Totally. And I think like it'd be weird for reporters to think, how will this story impact who people vote for? How can I impact who people vote for? That's how I'm going to do coverage. Like, that's kind of messed up, right? Like, obviously you want to give people information that's valuable and helps them understand candidates. But this idea that, like, if it doesn't sway a vote, it's not worth publishing, is like, come on, that's weird. Like, no. And I think there's lots of interesting
There's this impression that this came right on the heels of that stupid parking tickets or traffic speeding violations.
Right. Yeah, that's true.
I can see why now there's this thing developing, like the New York Times is scared of Marco Rubio, so they're trying to destroy him, to protect Hillary Clinton. They will never publish anything bad against Hillary Clinton, except, oh, whoops, like all those email and foundation stories publishing for months.
Right, yeah.
So yeah, there is, I think people are just sort of looking for interesting stories to write.
Yeah, I think personal finance stories are interesting. Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm all on board with personal finance stories.
Well,
we did a personal finance story.
You're a rhino and a New York Times apologist, so
yeah, I know.
You're going to get it now.
We did a personal finance story about Scott Walker a couple months ago. The Boston Globe did this like big thing on all the candidates' personal finances. Scott Walker's net worth was the lowest, and it's all in a range. Basically, he has very low net worth, and depending on what end of the range he has, it might be a negative net worth. He has a lot of debt, including debt on a Sears credit card. And we wrote about that. And part of the reason we wrote about it was because when he was running for governor in 2010, he touted his personal financial responsibility as a reason to vote for him.
See, that's the thing.
See, he said, I pack a sack lunch and I take it to work every day and I drive a Saturn and my grandma always taught me.
I buy my clothes at Kohl's. My pants cost 50 cents, blah, blah, blah.
Right, and my grandma always taught me, never spend more money than you take in. So if you're going to put that in a TV ad and then you're going to spend more money than you take in, that's an interesting thing. I'm not saying people who read that story should be like, well, I would have voted for Scott Walker and now I will not vote for Scott Walker. Because
now Scott Walker should be shot into outer space. blowing through his money.
Yeah, no, like, of course not. Like, everyone has credit cards. Sometimes people put more on their credit cards than they need to. It's not like it's a disqualifying, crazy thing. But it's interesting. It's an interesting thing. We're going to write lots of stories where it's like, this is an interesting thing. We did a story on Jeb Bush saying he had no respect for Bill O'Reilly. You know, in one of the emails, Jeb Bush was like, Bill O'Reilly's the worst. I'm never going on a show. I have no respect for him. That probably is not going to change how anybody votes, but it's an interesting thing. And I like interesting thing stories. I'm a fan. So
why can't the silly readers just understand this?
I know.
The silly consumers of what we produce. Why can't they just get this?
Oh, well. But I mean, like, I haven't really gotten hate mail about any of this stuff. So I don't know. The Daily Beast's esteemed audience is very very discerning in how they consume
the Daily Beast gets it.
I imagine Salon's readers are very discerning in their news consumption as well.
They are. They send long, thoughtful essays with footnotes in response to any qualms they may have.
Responsible exclamation point usage.
Yeah. No, I don't actually get a ton of hate mail, which is surprising. Sometimes.
Nice. Yeah. Does it make you feel like a little bad? Do you feel like you should be getting more of it?
Well, yeah, sometimes a little bit. We do. Our readership is into Bernie, though. That's for sure.
Okay, interesting. That's interesting. Huh.
Although there are also a lot of people into Hillary, so and then they just fight forever in the comments, and then go for it. That's fun. That's what we live for. Fight about things in the comments.
America. It's really good. Well, this was fun. I'm glad we did this, and we will make another one of these helpful and illuminating conversations in maybe a couple weeks. 2 weeks or so.
Yeah, something like that.
Awesome.
We'll figure it out. Maybe it'll be like with Daniel, like a Brian Williams type situation where he never returns and I just steal his job.
Daniel goes out for a cigarette, never comes back.
Yeah, exactly. You weep and think about him, yeah.
Who's that Daniel guy? I don't even remember. Huh? Was there a Daniel person involved?
Isn't his name David? I heard his name was David Strauss.
David Smith, I think? Yeah. Okay. Anyways, this was good. I'm glad to do this, and thank you for listening, Blogging Heads audience.
Thank you, everyone.
All right, bye.